Welcome. My name is Dr. Beverly Peters, and I am a professor at the School of Professional and Extended Studies at American University. Today, I am here with Babylonia Aziz, who is the head of awards for the Middle East and Eastern Europe at the humanitarian aid organization Save the Children. Thank you, Babylonia, for joining us today.
Thank you, Bev. It's great to be here and it's great to be reunited.
Tell us about your undergraduate or graduate course of study.
Yes, my undergraduate course of study was biology with a minor in chemistry and economics, and went to graduate school for international affairs. At the time, it was just after 9/11, and there was a lot of interest in not just global affairs for security purposes, but sort of an expanded look at globalization and how the sciences fit into it, in particular agriculture and trade around, free trade was sort of expanding in most of the world. My favorite course of study, which sort of ties back into it, was a course on the economics of ecosystems and ecology. What I loved about it is that if you study sciences, there's a lot of models and conceptualization of how you evaluate activities in life. And then if you go to economics, you find those exact same models exist, probably not made by the same people, but they really have almost identical kind of mapping of the way they look at the world. And I really enjoyed looking at ecology, ecosystems through not just a study of life, but a study of how supply and demand fits into the picture, of where there's equilibrium, of where there are periods of rapid gains and losses, and sort of macro and microeconomic principles applied to not just human activity, but to sort of biological nature and that kind of thing. And so that really pulled me out of labs, put me into sort of a global stage. And then from there, I just kind of kept following it and ended up where I did.
Tell me about the company, the organization that you work for now, and what is their mission? What do you do at the firm?
Well, it's Save the Children, which is about 100 years old, 101-year-old charity dedicated to saving children, as is our name. We work in three key areas. We believe that children have the right to survive up to the age of 5, obviously beyond that, but the main area of focus is survival, passing away before the age of 5. We believe children have the right to be educated, and most of our programming is educational outreach and setting up schools overseas and domestically in the U.S., and ensuring education reaches genders and different minority groups and marginalized areas thrive and be protected, which is to prevent exploitation and prevent situations where children can be taken advantage of, whether it's sexual exploitation, work, child labor, and other kinds of areas. But we really develop a lot of programming to prevent it, and then to, when we encounter it, confront it, interact with authorities, and undergo sort of our main protection principles and reunite families and reunite children. And it's a very rewarding organization to work for. We see a lot of change directly from our involvement, especially under COVID circumstances when children are out of schools. Our child protection officers are very active in communities, and especially in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, which is where I focus my work. Sort of a very strong base of 13 country offices from which we respond, not just humanitarian crises, but day to day, and even in some of the more developed economies, we ensure children's rights are protected, their health and education is attended to.
It sounds like some really rewarding work. Tell me, how did you get to that position?
It's interesting because what I described to you is sort of a background in sciences and economics, but when you're living overseas and working in these environments, there are some kind of common denominators. I worked on agricultural projects, I worked on clean energy projects, I worked on some of the more nuts and bolts kind of development work, which I had always been drawn to, but it didn't get that far. We couldn't make as much progress as we would have wanted to when you see suffering in communities, and especially where in the Middle East, where you have a lot of displaced populations and families split, and terrorist groups coming in like ISIS, and you see what that does not only to the existing infrastructure, but to the work you have been doing. And so I just kept coming back to it. I also got married and had my own children, and that does change your perspective towards your life priorities, etc. And I found that if there was a way that I could serve an organization that serves children, I would probably find more reward in that. And we're still doing a lot of those activities, but it's through the lens of child rights, children's rights, and protection and safety and security. And I think that that has kind of sort of followed it naturally this way. And the most important thing I did, though, was to hone a skill that would be of use to an organization like Save the Children. My background is in contract management and compliance, which does not sound exciting, but if you're in the hard sciences, you are a rules person and you'd like things explained. And I always kept getting drawn to sort of the contractual management side of our programming. Technical implementation is great, but I was not going to be a microfinance expert, and I was never going to be sort of a health expert or any, pick your expertise area. Being a contract management expert let me sort of be a general use to every project, because you always get money from somebody and you always have to use that. And you always have to be very transparent and ensure that the objectives are met. Learning that skill from the US government side, from how their regulations apply, and then finding out how other donors and other multilaterals do it, you can really build a body of knowledge that's of use to an organization like Save the Children or other humanitarian groups. And what I do now is advise on the compliance in all of our country offices and really ensure that funding is going to the source, to the beneficiaries, and not getting caught up in diversion or getting kind of pulled into other areas, which has a tendency to happen. And we also do work a great deal with local NGOs, partners who may not have had access to big pools of funding and then overnight get large grants or get some sort of, after there's a humanitarian crisis, an earthquake, a Beirut blast, for example, they might get propped up with a lot of funding that they don't have the systems to accommodate or put through transparently. And I spend a lot of time helping those organizations improve their processes and develop some standards that enable them to execute and do their work.
Can you describe a typical day and perhaps include one of your biggest challenges or something that you really adore about the work?
There's no typical day right now, Bev. I'll be honest with you. I am supposed to be based in the Middle East. With COVID. We've relocated temporarily to the US, but I will be going back, and we're based normally in Amman, but this time we're going back to Turkey, which has the world's largest refugee population. So after we're settled there, what I expect will resume was sort of the typical day I had in the Middle East, which was you come into the office and we're a global movement. So Asia's got, that towards the end of their day, whatever they've been working on, we pick up and then onwards west. But my focus in particular is support to the country offices, and in particular their compliance and award management people. So I come in and I typically have calls with Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and onwards, and they will bring up an issue. We have a partner who disappeared with the funding, or we have a partner, or we have a program where we can't get the shipment into the country, or we have, whatever the issue is, a donor who is being very inflexible with some of their rules and how they apply. They don't apply the same way in Egypt, or they don't apply the same way in Turkey. How do we navigate this? And I advise them. We come up together with plans so that we can keep things moving. That's always the objective. We don't want to stop aid to children. With children, you have a very narrow window to deliver things. You really can't, you can't say, oh, wait 3 years, we'll get this done. Our goal is to get as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to beneficiaries. And we have to move things and keep them from standing in the way. So after a lot of meetings, I do spend a lot of time researching. And this is, again, where that skill set comes in. If you bring a tangible skill set, I know accountants, I know HR professionals, I know audit and compliance people who really work very hard on sharpening the saw of their trade, and then they apply it and find ways to serve. And so in my case, I do a lot of research on donors, and I see, for example, the Germans are going in this direction, or the Swedes are imposing new restrictions on economic sanctions on countries where you might have terrorist groups operating. How do we navigate that? How do we get programs in Syria when we don't know necessarily who we're always working with? Well, we set up structure so we do know who we're working with, and we work through partners who are established, identified, and we trust, and then we check on them constantly, and that's part of the way we deliver. So the day is a series of those actions. There's meetings, there's research, and then inevitably I end up presenting some information to a group of either country offices or headquarters type, where I say, look, we're really having a challenge here and we need your advocacy with this donor. For example, we had the US government recently banned the use of Chinese telecommunications products and services overseas on their awards because they cannot be trusted to stay out of the hands of Beijing. So that information, that beneficiary data, that national security data. So we now have to scrub all of our offices overseas of Huawei routers and ZTE fiber cables and any mobile devices. And so that kind of compliance stuff, it doesn't sound exciting. It's certainly not not with the children day to day, but these things can really stall and prevent aid from getting to its recipients. So we have to find a way and use compliance and contract management to navigate it so that we can keep getting our work done. So it is a lot of conversations and a lot of Excel sheets, a lot of research and PowerPoint presentations to interested parties.
What draws you to this work?
Oh gosh, when you go into development work, which is really what I went into, that was my objective, USAID projects in particular. I worked for Chemonics, I worked for other NGOs and for-profit contractors. And at some point you realize that if you're doing your work right, you're delivering impact on the ground, but you're ultimately making rich people richer. And I couldn't live with that much longer. And as living in the Middle East for 7 years, and we'll go back for another 4, you see what a difference it can make if you know what you're doing, if you bring, again, a tangible skill that you've developed, perhaps even outside of the area of development, health workers, et cetera. But if you bring a tangible skill, you see results from it and you can see progress incrementally. I think that kind of problem solving is very satisfying. It's hard to say no to it after a while. You can't go back to, what you were doing. At least I couldn't. So it always has to have a purpose for me. And I think saving children is a profound purpose. It motivates me to develop my skills more and become better and know more compliance, know more regulations, know more about how we can navigate that world to get aid to children when I know that we are making a difference. I know it sounds cheesy, but it's true.
And it's very admirable. Thanks very much for joining us today. That was such great information that our students will appreciate as they're starting their studies and their work at American University. Thanks, Babylonia Aziz, for joining us from Save the Children. I really appreciate the time that you took with us today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck to all the students.
Thank you.